everybody, I'm Butch Stearns coming to you from the Activate Networks Summit 2012. Activate Networks Summit is the leading conference when it comes to the power of harnessing your customer and employee networks to drive results. This conference is filled with thought leaders from the industry, and joining me right now is Juan Enriquez, who is a morning keynote. He's also the managing director of Excel Venture Management, a best-selling author, a Harvard graduate. Need I go on, Juan?
I'm going to quit while I'm ahead.
Nice to meet you, my friend.
Great to meet you.
Nice job up there, up on stage. Talk to me about what you like to talk about. I don't need you to do your whole speech over again or a whole presentation, but what is it that you're passionate about when it comes to this industry, when it comes to social networks of your customers and your employees?
So I think what's happening is we're beginning to understand the world in terms of social networks and how people interact with one another and not just what org charts look like. And very often we look at an organization, we look at the org chart, we think that's the way it really works, but of course what we found in Facebook, in our friends, in our social networks, in our Blackberries, in our Amazon purchases, is that our interactions with the world, our interactions with our friends of friends, are increasingly important to being able to get a job done, to understand the world, to run a business, to understand what can hurt you. And this is information we have, and those who are acting on this information are doing very well, and those who are ignoring it and staying in the old chart world are falling further and further behind.
So when you say those that are acting on it, I want to start with a term and ask you to explain it a little better. What's the language of life? What does that mean?
So one of the really interesting things that's beginning to happen is we're transitioning from a world that used to communicate by writing on cave walls and making little drawings to a world that moved into hieroglyphs that were stylized cave drawings, to a world that works in ABCs and abstracts, concepts, ideas, drawings, to the last 30 years where we've collapsed every word written and spoken in every language into a digital language. So we've collapsed photographs and music and film and everything we do to the point where 98% of the data we transmit today is in digital code. That's generated the world's largest businesses. What's starting to happen now is we're beginning to understand the language that all life is written in, bacteria, plants, animals, ourselves, into the 4 letters of DNA. And so we have the first genomes, and then we can copy them in clones, and now we can begin to rewrite life code and understand life as networks. In the measure we do that, that will be the biggest single driver of the global economy.
So are we going back to the basics? As someone who spent your career talking about life sciences, talking about human behavior, when we talk about language, I mean, some of this may be semantics or maybe not. Are we going back to the basics when it comes to tapping into your customer and your employee networks to drive results with your company? Are we going back to the basics with the language of life? Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is the way in which business is conducted in the future is going to depend on adopting and adapting. It's not the big and powerful that survive. Time and again, what you see happen is the most powerful corporations vaporize. That's the reason why most of the people who are at the Fortune 50 weren't there a couple of decades ago. And why you get the rise of these companies that come seemingly out of nowhere, like Facebook, that will likely achieve a market cap similar to that of General Electric, but in about less than a 1/12 of the time. And as you're thinking about systems like that, adopting and adapting is going to depend on 2 things. One is understanding new technologies and new ways of understanding how the world interacts, and that's where social networks are incredibly important. And 2, the instruments that you can have to make things, process things, structure things, and I think we're moving from a digital universe into a universe that begins to code in life. And there's 2 big differences here. The first is life code makes its own hardware. So no matter how I program a computer, I won't have 1,000 computers in the morning. If I program a bacteria, I will have 1,000,000 bacteria in the morning. And how we make vaccines, how we make chemicals, how we make pharmaceuticals, how we process information, how much information is available, all that is going to change as we understand networks and as we understand life.
A couple last questions. When it comes to SNA, social network analytics, how this is a broad question, but how how is it affecting the way businesses behave, the way they analyze social networks, the way they try to capitalize on those networks?
So, social networks was seen almost as a toy until you got this enormous rise in companies like Amazon, in companies like Facebook, in companies like Instagram, in companies like Groupon, etc. And you're seeing this very rapid rise and fall of various ways of beginning to understand something that turns out to be innate in human beings. One of the most important papers published in the last year was Nicholas Christakis' work showing that even among African Bushmen, social networking is normal. The difference today is we're having to social network with hundreds and thousands of people across cultures, across languages, across companies, across functions. And in the measure that we want to understand and integrate the world better, those who survive are those best able to adapt and adopt to a networked world. And that's part of what we're beginning to understand and map at this summit today.
Let's talk about your book. It's a bestseller. Congratulations. As the Future Catches You, what are people going to get out of your book if they haven't read it? What do you hope they get out of it?
So what I'm trying to map, and As the Future Catches You, is this very, very fast-moving world where a lot of the trends, I'm not smart enough to be a futurist, so what I'm doing is I'm taking things which are history, which have already happened, but which are surprising to people because a lot of them haven't seen it yet. So a lot of the people at the summit are going to be exposed to things that are less than a year old, but that can fundamentally change companies as they exist today or generate new companies that will be on the scale of some of the largest companies today. And what I'm trying to do in my books and articles is to say, okay, here's what's happened, here's what people have discovered, and here's some of the implications of what this might mean as you roll it out across the economy and your business and maybe even your own personal network.
Looking back at history and seeing what it's taught us.
Looking at recent history and looking at what that implies for changing countries, changing industries, changing individuals.
Interesting. Final question for you. This conference, gathering these many people, these thought leaders in this room, what have you learned at this conference so far today?
You know, there are so many smart people at this conference. One of the things that's really interesting, people at this conference are seeing data for the first time in a large group. And some of that data, like James Fowler, can affect the body politic and how we understand politics and politics as networks. The work that Nicholas Christakis is going to present looks at the absolute fundamental structures of how we're humans. And, of course, Rob Cross's work and a series of other papers and presentations we're going to see today go to absolutely fundamental questions. There's a presentation by Shape Up that talks by a really smart medical student who really is thinking about how do you prevent escalating healthcare costs, making prevention front and center using social networks.
Interesting.
It's a neat summit.
Juan, nice to meet you, my friend.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for spending a few minutes. Juan Enriquez, one of the morning keynotes here at the Activate Network Summit 2012. I'm Butch Stearns of the Pulse Network at thepulsenetwork.com.